The question that struck Caleb Morgan like a hammer blow was small, trembling, and spoken by a child who had nothing left to bargain with except hope. "Please don't take our food. We saved all day for this." It followed him like a ghost through the biting wind, through the snow-choked yard of Morgan Ranch, through the silence he had worn like armor for years. Late winter of 1889 had turned the Wyoming Valley into a frozen grave of white and shadow. But somehow that one plea cut deeper than any storm he had ever weathered. Caleb stood there, boots half buried in snow, staring at the 4 children huddled around a scrap of bread as if it were gold. Noah, thin as a fence rail, shielded his younger siblings, Lila clutching a torn shawl, Jonah rubbing his numb hands together, and baby Emma wrapped in nothing more than a fraying blanket. A ranch hand barked at them to leave. But Caleb lifted one hand, slow and steady, stopping him without a word. Words were rarely his way. Silence was safer, less likely to betray the cracks inside him. Instead of speaking, he turned toward the cookhouse, stepping into the warmth only long enough to ask for a single meal. Beans, cornbread, potatoes, a slice of ham, 1 apple. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. When he came back outside, he crossed the yard without letting his boots crunch too loudly in the snow. He laid the parcel near the windbreak where the children crouched, and without acknowledging their wide eyes or their frozen stillness, he walked away. No looking back. No kindness declared. Just a silent promise made by a man who didn't yet understand why he had stepped into their suffering at all. But the promise followed him anyway. It tugged at him the next morning and the morning after, until he found himself scanning the ranch yard whenever he stepped outside the barn. The storm had worsened, shaping knife-edge drifts and freezing the air so sharply that each breath stung. Yet the children still came. Hunger had a way of beating fear. One afternoon, Caleb watched from a distance as Noah carefully divided crumbs between Lila and Jonah before taking the smallest piece for himself. Baby Emma didn't cry. Though her lips were blue, she was too tired to cry. Caleb's jaw tightened, and the familiar heaviness began pressing against his ribs, threatening to crack through the silence he kept so carefully controlled. He walked the perimeter of the ranch, letting the cold numb the old wound he never named aloud. The one Charlotte Hayes left behind when she disappeared with the money they had saved and the future they'd once spoken of as if it were carved in stone. Since then, he had lived in quiet routine, avoiding anything that asked him to feel more than necessary. But the children did not ask permission. They simply existed, hungry, cold, and persistent in a way that unsettled him. 3 days after he first saw them, he found their shelter. A patchwork tent of burlap sacks leaned against the broken frame of an abandoned livestock shed. Abby Walker knelt inside, her breath leaving pale wisps in the frigid air as she tried to warm baby Emma between her hands. She didn't see Caleb standing in the snow, didn't notice the way his expression tightened, or how he turned away suddenly, as if intruding on something sacred. That night, he carried a small crate toward the makeshift shelter. Inside were food, a stack of split firewood, 2 pairs of children's mittens, and a scarf he hadn't worn since before Charlotte left. He set it down quietly near the entrance, careful not to disturb them. In the morning, it was gone. But something else appeared instead. Crude lines drawn on a scrap of paper, a child's unfinished picture of a man beside a horse. At the bottom, in shaky letters, "Mama says you are a good man." Caleb stared at the note until his breath clouded around it. No one had called him a good man in years. Maybe ever. He folded the drawing once, then again, and slipped it into his coat. After that, leaving things for the walkers became a quiet ritual, a rhythm a necessity. The children began waiting for the dawn, watching the snow for new footprints. They whispered about the magic spot, where food appeared as if winter itself had mercy. Caleb made sure they never saw him, as if speaking or being thanked might break whatever fragile thread connected them. He convinced himself it was simply charity, duty. But late one evening, as he returned to his cabin and set the lantern down on his table, he discovered that he was smiling. Soft, unplanned, a small crack in the wall he thought would never break. The world outside was still frozen, still merciless, still the same one that took Charlotte from him. But something had shifted. A quiet tug, a whisper that these children had unknowingly pulled him back toward the living. And though he would never admit it, not yet, Caleb Morgan had begun moving toward them long before he realized he wanted to. The night had a way of swallowing sound on the Wyoming frontier, turning every movement into a secret and every breath into a quiet confession. For Caleb Morgan, those nights became a pattern, a ritual he neither announced nor fully understood. Long after the ranch hands had gone to sleep and the lanterns inside the bunkhouse dimmed, he walked the snow-packed path toward the abandoned shed where Abby Walker and her children tried to survive the winter. He carried whatever he could gather without drawing attention. Jars of beans, a loaf of bread, fabric scraps for insulation, herbs for fevers, sometimes even something small for comfort. A ribbon, a handful of nails, a block of soap. Anything that might tell a struggling family, you have not been forgotten. He never knocked, never spoke, never waited to be seen. He left the items carefully near the warped wooden post the children called the magic spot, then stepped back into the shadows before his own heartbeat betrayed him. Yet each time he returned, something was waiting. Child-sized footprints scattered around the snow. A lopsided snowman with a stick hat. Small drawings scratched onto scraps of paper. Noah's horses with uneven legs, Lila's sun with too many rays, Jonah's attempt at writing his own name with the letters shifted sideways, and once, a picture of a man with a coat, standing near a barn. Beneath it, Noah had written in trembling pencil, "Thank you, mister." Caleb stared at that drawing longer than he intended. Something warm pressed against the center of his chest, unwelcome yet undeniable. It had been so long since anything softened him that the feeling almost hurt. But the note that undid him came a week later. This one in Abby's handwriting, not elegant, not practiced, but steady. "Your kindness reaches us more than you know." He folded the paper with care, the way a man might handle something fragile. And the ache he'd tried to bury for 7 years stirred as though waking from a hard sleep. The ghost behind that ache had a name. Charlotte Hayes, the woman with honey-brown eyes and a voice that once promised forever. The woman who left him with a letter that said she wanted more than a rancher's slow life, leaving him a ring that no longer meant anything and a debt he had paid in loneliness. For years, Caleb had lived behind thick walls. Work, silence, routine. Nothing entered. Nothing left. But Abby's quiet gratitude slid through those defenses like a thin blade, not meant to wound, yet cutting anyway. He found himself thinking of her when he shouldn't. Her calm way of holding Emma even when her hands were shaking from cold. The way she never begged, never asked for anything more than what appeared at the magic spot. The way she kept dignity wrapped around her children, even when she barely had blankets to cover them. One evening, the cold felt sharper than usual. Snow stung like sand, wind pushing hard against him as he walked to her shelter with a navy coat folded under his arm. It was the coat he had once bought to wear on the day he planned to propose to Charlotte. A foolish thought now, a memory that tasted like metal. He hesitated before laying it inside the entrance of Abby's shelter. A coat carried meaning, a coat was personal, but he did it anyway, fingers brushing the fabric for the briefest second before he stepped back into the dark. Hours later, unable to sleep, he found himself imagining Abby discovering it, wondering if she would recognize the weight of the gesture, wondering why he cared, whether she did. The next morning, he got his answer. The coat was gone, but in its place stood a tiny bouquet of dried sage wrapped with twine. A simple offering, a thank you, a boundary acknowledged. Caleb touched the sage with a thumb that trembled more than he liked. He wasn't a man easily moved by tokens. He wasn't someone who invited sentiment. But Abby's small gesture felt like something more than gratitude. It felt like trust. And trust was something Caleb hadn't held in his hands since the day Charlotte's letter landed on his table like a sentence he didn't want to read. That night, the memories he usually avoided came back sharper than usual. Charlotte's laughter as she spun in the sunlight. The ring he'd saved for years to buy. The moment he learned she had emptied their account and taken the stagecoach out of town. He remembered how he sat alone for hours afterward, staring at the space she left behind, a space he had filled with silence ever since. But now, the silence felt unsettled. Because in Abby's world, even suffering had sound. Soft whispers to comfort a frightened child. The scrape of Lila's boots across frozen earth. The muffled laughter when Jonah discovered Caleb had left them a tin cup full of peppermint candies one night. They were small sounds, but enough to pull him forward, step by step, until he realized he had already crossed a line he never intended to approach. The children's drawings stacked neatly in his drawer. Abby's note in his pocket, the coat no longer his. The ghost of Charlotte fading a little each night, replaced by something new, something fragile and terrifying precisely because it felt so alive. Caleb Morgan had survived betrayal by closing every door inside him. But Abby Walker and her children had opened one without even trying. And though he told himself these gifts in the dark were harmless, part of him already knew the truth. The simple act of caring for them was waking a part of him he thought had died long ago. Rumors began the way winter winds did in Wyoming. Quiet at first, then sharp enough to peel the skin. All it took was one ranch hand noticing the footprints near the old shed, another spotting Caleb leaving the cookhouse with more food than usual. And soon whispers traveled from bunkhouse to saloon, from saloon to mercantile, twisting into something heavier, uglier, and far from the truth. People talked. People judged. People filled silence with poison, because silence was easier to shape into scandal than into kindness. A wealthy rancher helping a poor woman with 4 children and no husband. There was only one story the town was eager to believe. By the end of the week, those whispers had reached Franklin Carter, Caleb's foreman, a man loyal to the ranch, but loyal also to caution. Franklin confronted him one icy morning near the barn, where the frost clung to Caleb's scarf and his breath lingered in the air like drifting smoke. "Caleb," Franklin began, lowering his voice. "There's talk in town about the woman in the shed, about you." Caleb didn't stop working. He continued fastening the saddle girth on his horse, movement steady, composed, restrained the way he'd trained himself to be. "People talk," he said simply. "They always have. This is different," Franklin pushed. "They're saying you're keeping her there, that you're involved." The word hung between them, dirty and unwanted. Caleb's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm, almost cold. "I brought food to hungry children. That's the beginning and the end of it." "Is it?" Franklin asked quietly. "Because if it isn't, the town will make up the rest. And you know how fast a man's reputation can fall around here." Caleb paused long enough for Franklin to understand. He had stepped close to a boundary. "What they say," Caleb murmured, has no bearing on what is right. Franklin exhaled, frustrated because he knew he would not win. Just consider being more discreet. Caleb said nothing more. Discretion had been his entire life, until now. Yet he didn't argue. He didn't explain. He simply rode out to deliver another crate of food that night, ignoring the sting of judgment he sensed in the air. But the rumors grew anyway. And they grew teeth. Women in the mercantile whispered about Abby when she came into town, wrapped in Caleb's navy coat. Men at the saloon joked crudely about the mysterious charity of the Morgan rancher. Children repeated half-heard stories in the street, making the Walker kids shrink further into themselves. Abby felt the weight of it most sharply. She kept her head lowered when she stepped into the general store, gripping Emma close, aware of the stares. Her dignity stayed intact, but her hope frayed thread by thread. One morning, Noah returned to the shed with tears he tried to hide. They said Mama's wicked, he whispered. They said a man wouldn't help us unless... He couldn't finish. Abby knelt in the snow, both hands cupping his face. You listen to me, she murmured, voice steady even when her heart wasn't. Goodness exists. Caleb has it. That's all you need to know. But the truth was, Abby feared the damage these rumors could do, especially to the man who had saved her children from starving. She thought of returning the coat, of leaving before the town poisoned whatever fragile peace they had found. Meanwhile, Caleb continued his nightly deliveries, but each gift felt heavier now, as if wrapped in the expectations of the entire valley. The darkness comforted him, allowed him to move without the scrutiny of judging eyes. Still, every time he saw the flicker of a lantern inside the shed, he felt a strange tug. Protective, grounding, dangerous only because it resembled something he once lost. When Sunday came, the gossip reached its boiling point. People crowded into Hope Valley Church, murmuring as Abby and the children slipped silently into a back pew. Their presence alone stirred murmurs like bees in a hive. Caleb walked in moments later, and the murmurs became a low roar. He didn't look around, didn't bow his head at the stares that followed him. He walked straight to Abby's pew, stood still as stone beside her, and extended a hand, not to touch, but to invite her to stand. Abby hesitated only a second before rising, lifting Emma to her hip. The other children pressed close to her. The entire church fell silent. Caleb turned toward the congregation. His voice, though quiet, carried like a crack of lightning. These children, he said, and their mother, live under my protection, on my land, under my roof, not because of rumor, not because of obligation, because it is right. A sharp breath rippled through the room. Someone whispered, "He's ruined." Another muttered, "What is he thinking?" Caleb continued, unshaken, "You may choose to judge them. I will not." The Reverend Samuel Hale stepped forward, hand raised. "Amen," he said simply, firmly, as if sealing Caleb's statement with holy weight. And for once, the congregation had no rebuttal. The murmurs died, replaced by an uneasy quiet. Abby looked at Caleb, not with fear, not with shame, but with something that felt dangerously close to gratitude, too deep for words. As they stepped out into the cold afterward, something shifted between them. Not a confession, not a promise, but a clarity. The town had chosen its suspicion. Caleb had chosen his defiance, and in that choice, he had chosen them. Abby didn't speak. Caleb didn't need her to. Sometimes silence said more than anything words could hope to hold. But the truth hung in the frozen air as clearly as their breath. Caleb Morgan had drawn a line in the snow, and he had done it for her family. What none of them knew yet was how soon that line would be tested, and how dangerously close the night would come to taking everything back. The sound that tore Caleb from sleep was not loud. It was faint, too faint for most men to notice through the thick Wyoming night. But it carried something sharp enough to slice straight through his chest. A child's scream swallowed quickly by wind. He was on his feet before the thought fully formed, boots half-laced as he threw open his cabin door. The sky glowed an unnatural orange above the abandoned shed where Abby and her children slept. Fire, not the crackle of a camp blaze. This was a roar, hungry, rising, alive. Caleb didn't remember crossing the yard. One heartbeat, he was staring at the flames devouring the burlap walls, and in the next, he was inside the inferno, the heat hitting him with the full weight of a furnace. Smoke clawed at his throat, blinding, bitter, thick enough to choke a grown man in seconds. He dropped low, instinct pressing him toward the floorboards as he crawled into the heart of the burning structure. "Noah! Uri!" he shouted, voice breaking against the roar. "Lila! Jonah! Abby!" A small cry answered him, the kind torn from a throat too frightened to shape a full word. It was Jonah. Caleb lunged toward the sound, sweeping the boy into his arms. Jonah clung to him, coughing, sobbing his name, even though Caleb never told them to call him anything at all. He pushed Jonah toward the opening he had broken through, shouting for him to run, not look back. Then he turned again into the fire. Heat lashed his skin, rafters groaned overhead. Sparks rained like burning snow. "Lila!" Caleb's voice cracked. Then another cry, higher, panicked. Lila stumbled out from behind a collapsed barrel, hair streaked with ash, clutching a blanket wrapped around something. Someone. Emma. Caleb took both girls into his arms without hesitation. Emma's tiny hands trembled against his chest, her breath shallow. He secured them against him, then forced himself toward the hole where the cold air cut through the smoke like salvation. He pushed them out into waiting arms, Jonah pulling, Noah shouting for help. But Abby was still inside. Another beam snapped overhead. The roof began to cave in. Caleb didn't think. He moved. He had lived in silence for 7 years, but this was the first time he felt fear, not for himself, but for someone he could not bear to lose. "Abby," he shouted, voice raw, body already plunging deeper into the collapsing structure. He found her near the back wall, half conscious, one arm shielding her face, the other reaching toward the spot where Emma had been moments earlier. When Caleb touched her shoulder, she startled. But when she recognized him through the smoke, her expression crumpled. Not in fear, but in something heartbreakingly relieved. He lifted her into his arms, but as he did, a burning beam cracked loose, slamming hard into his back. Pain tore through him, white and blinding. He staggered, but didn't fall. Abby pressed her forehead into his collarbone, voice weak against his ear. "Caleb, please. I've got you," he rasped. And he did. Even as another piece of the roof collapsed behind them, even as fire licked at his coat, even as his lungs seized, he pushed through the opening just as the entire shed gave way, collapsing into itself in a burst of sparks that illuminated the frozen night like twisted fireworks. The cold air outside hit him like a plunge into icy water. He fell to his knees, Abby still in his arms, children crying, reaching for her, for him. The world spun. Someone yelled for water. Someone else ran to fetch the doctor. Caleb heard none of it clearly. He felt Abby's hand on his cheek, trembling but alive. "Caleb, you came back for me." He tried to answer, but his body folded, darkness sweeping him under. When he woke, light pressed against his eyelids. Dim, warm, steady. His cabin. The smell of herbs and clean water. The soft weight of a blanket. And Abby sitting beside him, her hair loosely braided, exhaustion softening her features, worry still tightening her posture. "You're awake." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it steadied him more than any medicine could. "How long?" he murmured. 2 days, she said. "You scared us. The children wouldn't sleep without checking if you were breathing." He swallowed, throat rough. "The fire?" "Gone," she whispered. "Everything we had, gone. But you saved us." Caleb shifted, pain ripping through his back. Abby reached forward as if to steady him, then hesitated, until he met her eyes. Then she didn't hesitate anymore. Her hand rested lightly on his forearm, warm against his cold skin. That simple touch unraveled something deep inside him. "Abby," he began, voice unsteady. "I shouldn't have let you stay in that shed. I should have." "You saved our lives," she cut in gently. "You've given us more than anyone ever has." He shook his head, guilt carving lines across his features. "I left you out there, in the cold, alone. I didn't know how to be anything more than a man who watches from a distance." Abby leaned closer. "Caleb, you didn't leave us. You found us." Silence stretched between them, soft, not empty. A silence that held meaning, not fear. Her gaze searched his, steady and unflinching. "You don't need to be needed," she whispered. "You only need to be seen. And you are." The words struck him harder than any falling beam. Seen, after years of being a shadow, a shell, a man who refused to feel because feeling once destroyed him. She saw him. He looked away, breath shaky. "I lost everything once," he admitted. "Charlotte took my trust, my future. I shut the door on the world after that." Abby reached up, fingers brushing the side of his jaw. "Then let this be the moment," she murmured. "You open it again." Her touch was warm, intentional, soft enough to let him pull away, strong enough to tell him he didn't need to. Caleb didn't pull away. His breath trembled, but his heart, slow, heavy, waking, beat with something unfamiliar. Something terrifying. Something alive in that small cabin, with the wind howling outside and the memory of fire still clinging to his clothes. Caleb Morgan realized the truth. He had risked his life not because duty demanded it, but because losing Abby, even the possibility of losing her, was a pain he could not bear. And she felt it too, not in words, in the way she stayed, in the way her hand didn't leave his, in the way her presence filled a space inside him that had been cold for far too long. Between them, the world shifted, quietly, irrevocably. Spring arrived in Wyoming the way forgiveness arrives in a wounded heart. Slowly at first, almost imperceptible. Then all at once with a warmth no one dares question. Snow retreated from the valley floor, exposing damp earth and shy blades of grass. The wind softened, carrying the scent of pine instead of smoke. And for the first time in months, Caleb Morgan felt something inside him loosen, as if winter had finally lifted its weight off his chest. Abby and the children remained in his cabin during those early spring weeks. Not because he insisted, but because the fire had taken everything, and there was nowhere else to go. The arrangement was quiet, natural, unspoken. Abby rose early to warm the room and soothe Emma. Noah helped feed the horses. Lila folded blankets with an earnest seriousness beyond her age. Jonah followed Caleb everywhere, mimicking his footsteps, trying to match his long stride. And Emma, soft-haired, wide-eyed, reached for him every time he passed, her tiny hand settling on his shoulder as if she had always known him. Caleb didn't call this a family. Not aloud. But when he watched Abby hum to the children at night, when he saw Noah race across the yard with a grin, or when Lila handed him a daisy with shy pride, something in him whispered the truth he wasn't ready to say. This is home. This is what home feels like. Yet even as warmth crept back into the valley, a quiet fear gnawed at him. They couldn't stay crowded in the cabin forever. They needed a real house, a safe one, with walls that didn't shake in the wind, with a roof untouched by fire, with space enough for a woman and 4 growing children who deserved more than survival. So Caleb made a decision. One morning before sunrise, he stood by the lake at the southern edge of his property. The ice had cracked open into glassy blue water, and the pines reflected in the ripples like a promise. This would be the place, a place untouched by rumor, untouched by fire, untouched by the past. He walked back to the cabin and found Abby preparing porridge. The children slept in a tangled heap near the hearth. She looked up at him, eyes warm, curious, already reading the shift in him. She had a quiet gift for seeing things before they were spoken. "I'm building something," he said simply. Abby waited. Caleb cleared his throat. "A house, down by the lake." Her breath caught. "For the children," he added, but they both knew that explanation didn't reach far enough. Not nearly. "For all of you," he finished, softer now. Abby didn't speak at first. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something steadier, deeper. Gratitude, relief, something tremulous and hopeful. "Caleb," she whispered. "You don't owe us, I know," he interrupted. "But I choose to." The truth lay bare between them. A truth that asked for no permission and feared no misunderstanding. Over the next weeks, the ranch hummed with unfamiliar purpose. Caleb cut timber with precision. Noah fetched nails and tools, eager to help. Lila brought wildflowers and placed them in the unfinished windowsills. Abby prepared food for the long work days, and when Caleb's back strained from too many hours with the saw, she rested a firm, steady hand on his spine. Gentle, but grounding, the house rose slowly from the earth. A modest structure, neither large nor grand, but sturdy. A front porch that caught the morning sun. 2 rooms for the children, 1 room for Abby. A kitchen with a stone hearth. And on one quiet afternoon, Caleb stood inside the doorway, imagining laughter filling the space the way wind filled the pine branches outside. He hadn't allowed himself such imagining since before Charlotte left, back when hope felt dangerous. But now hope felt different. It felt earned, not fragile, but strong. One evening, when the last board was hammered in place, Abby stepped across the threshold for the first time. She paused, taking in the walls, the windows, the scent of fresh timber and clean air. The children ran past her, their joy echoing against the new walls. Emma toddled after them, stumbling into Caleb's arms. He lifted her easily, the motion instinctive now. Abby looked at him then, a long, steady look that reached him deeper than any words could. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It's yours," Caleb replied. Abby shook her head. "It's ours," she corrected gently. Something in Caleb broke open, not painfully, but with the soft crack of ice thawing under sunlight. That night, as dusk fell pink and gold behind the mountains, Caleb walked to the edge of the property where the old ranch sign stood. Morgan Estate, the name Charlotte once dreamed of claiming. A symbol of everything he had built alone, everything he had guarded too tightly. He removed it with steady hands. In its place, He hung a new sign he carved himself. Each letter shaped slowly, carefully, honestly. Morgan family. Not for sale, not land, not legacy, not reputation. Family. A choice, not a possession. Abby stood beside him, Emma asleep in her arms, the other children leaning against Caleb's legs, warm and safe beneath the fading spring sky. For the first time, Caleb didn't feel like a man standing on his land. He felt like a man standing where he belonged. And when Abby's shoulder brushed his, when Noah slipped his small hand into his, when Lila placed one of her yellow wildflowers into his palm, Caleb Morgan understood that the house was not the home. They were, and the home existed because he finally let himself step into it. Spring settled over the valley like a long exhale, warm and unhurried, washing away the last remnants of cold that once held them captive. In the soft light of evening, the lake shimmered with fading gold, and the quiet rhythm of family life. Footsteps, laughter, the hush of bedtime, floated from the little house Caleb built with his own hands. Inside, Abby tucked the children beneath clean blankets while Emma slept curled against her chest, peaceful and safe. Caleb stood in the doorway, watching them, absorbing the gentle miracle of it all. The way life could break, then mend, then grow again if given the smallest chance to breathe. He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if not to disturb the fragile grace of the moment. "You're home now," he whispered, though the words were as much for himself as for them. Abby looked up, her smile soft, warm, steady. "Yes," she murmured. "We are." Outside, the sign he carved leaned quietly in the twilight, its message simple but true, a reminder of the life he had chosen and the love that had found him when he least expected it. And so the night closed gently around them, holding the family they had become. End of article. Good night.